Hey there, Bible nerds. Welcome back to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. What if God cared so deeply about your everyday life that He even had opinions about your skincare, your snacks, and your schedule? Today we are diving into Leviticus chapters 10 through 18. So grab your drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. Alright, so this story picks up right after a glorious moment. The priests, Aaron and his sons, have just been ordained. The tabernacle is sparkling new. The people have seen God's fire come down and consume the first offerings from the altar. Everyone's jaws are on the floor. God's presence is literally among them. In that moment of holy awe, two guys decide to improvise. Of course, we always have some troublemakers. So enter Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's oldest sons, the OG preacher's kids. Why is it always the preacher's kids or the pastor's kids? Anyway, so they're newly appointed priests standing in front of the altar, surrounded by incense, smoke, and adrenaline. Everyone's still cheering from the fire miracle of the previous chapter. Maybe they wanted to keep the excitement going, or maybe they got a little too confident in their new roles. Who knows? But here's what they do. They grab their censers, load them up with incense, and light it up with what the Bible calls strange fire, which is what they did is unauthorized, unapproved, and uninvited. God didn't tell them to do this. Now picture this. The crowd's still buzzing. The smoke rises, but suddenly it shifts. It's not their fire anymore. It's God's. And the Bible text says, "And fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord." Just like that. The same holy fire that showed God's glory in chapter 9 now became fire of judgment in chapter 10, this chapter. The scene goes from celebration to silence. Everyone freezes. No one breathes. Aaron's heart must have dropped to the floor. He's the high priest, and these are his sons. Two of his sons lying before the altar. Then Moses turns to Aaron and says quietly, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'Through those who come near me, I will show myself holy, and before all the people I will be glorified.'" And then the next line is haunting. It says, "And Aaron was silent." He doesn't speak, doesn't argue, doesn't cry out. It's as if he knows holiness isn't something you play with. Like, what can you do at that point? You know what I mean? That's literally like God's judgment. So Moses immediately calls Aaron's cousins, Mishael and Elzaphan, to carry Nadab and Abihu's bodies out to the sanctuary. They wrap them in their tunics and take them outside the camp, just as God instructed. It's somber, heartbreaking, but necessary. And then God gives Aaron new instructions. It's like as if to draw a clear line moving forward, saying, "You and your sons are not to drink wine or strong drink when you go into the tent of meeting, so that you may not die." So this is the first hint that Nadab and Abihu's reckless act might have been influenced by alcohol. Maybe they weren't thinking clearly. Maybe they thought they could make worship more creative. But God isn't impressed by performance. He values obedience. Now he tells Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, that their role is sacred. They must distinguish between the holy and the common, the clean and the unclean. Their job isn't to make worship flashy. It's to make God's holiness understood. Aaron and his remaining sons continue their priestly duties. They're still expected to eat the grain offering though in the holy place, but this time everything is quiet. No laughter, no joy, just reverence. Then there's a tense moment. Moses gets frustrated with Eleazar and Ithamar for not eating part of the sin offering as commanded. But Aaron defends them with quiet wisdom. He says, "Today they offered their sin and burnt offering before the Lord. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been acceptable in the Lord's sight?" So Moses, pause. I combined Moses and pauses. Moses pauses and agrees. What's the part say? Moses pauses and agrees. Aaron's grief is discerning and honored, even in loss. Aaron still shows deep understanding of God's heart. This chapter is a sobering one. It shows us that God's presence is both beautiful and powerful, not something to take lightly. Nadab and Abihu's mistake wasn't enthusiasm. Why do I feel like I'm saying that word wrong? Enthusiasm. Anyway, it was disobedience. They tried to do a holy thing in an unholy way. Sometimes we can do the same. Well, I feel like all the time, actually. And I see that with my daughter, too. She knows what she's supposed to do and not supposed to do at home. We have specific rules at home. Things like that. She knows. Granted, she's only, almost 5. She's still very young, but she knows what to do and what not to do when it comes to our home. But sometimes we still do what we want to do despite knowing the rules and instructions. We're human. Anyway, so we try to worship God our way without consulting Him first. We might even get caught up in emotions or appearances, but holiness requires humility. Aaron's silence teaches us that reverence sometimes looks like stillness. He did not argue with God, he just listened. And sometimes that's all you need to do. And let's be honest, if God's presence showed up today like fire, I don't even know, like flight or freeze, or I don't even know, honestly. But maybe that's the point. Holiness isn't about fear, it's about respecting His presence enough to follow His instructions. And that's something that I also need to teach my child now that she's still young enough to be molded, into the person that she is, that God meant for her to be. And that's the start for her to, if she can't respect me or listen to me, how is she gonna listen to God or honor God, So I need to start teaching her these life lessons now, these God lessons now, that, that she needs to respect, me at home and our instructions. Just respect me as a parent in general, and honor me as her parent. And, anyways, I digress. So, all right, fun fact corner. Did you know that in Jewish tradition, the term strange fire became a catchphrase? Rabbis would use it whenever someone did something God didn't ask for, like making up their own ritual or prayer style or whatever, making up things that is not of God or, not in the scripture. So it was the ancient equivalent of like, bruh, that is not in the script. Anyways. So also, historians believe the priests had to use fire only from the altar. So the one God Himself had lit. So Nadab and Abihu might have used fire from another source when they were doing what they did. That's like trying to plug into a fake outlet. It looks the same, but no real power flows from it. And that is it for chapter 10, y'all. Okay, Leviticus chapter 11. So the smoke of Nadab and Abihu's incident is still lingering in the air, literally and emotionally. Imagine smelling that. I've heard people like, from shows, like from crime shows and all that like from detectives and police, that the smell of a burnt human body is very distinct, and it's something that after you smell it the first time, if you smelled it again, like you will know that it is a human body. Like you will. It's very distinct, and you will never forget that smell, apparently. Anyway, so the camp is quiet, reflective, maybe even a little afraid. But God's not done teaching yet. There's still a lot more, actually. So now that He's established who can approach Him, who are the priests, He can move on to what His people can bring into their bodies. Because in God's world, holiness isn't just about what you do in the tabernacle, it's also about what's on your dinner plate. So God calls Moses and Aaron in for a divine kitchen talk. He says, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, these are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth." And just like that, the first ever dietary law of heaven is born. No Michelin stars, but absolute divine standards. So God starts with the animals on land. If it chews the cud and has a split hoof, it's clean. So let's translate that. So cows, yes, because it chews the cud and has split hoof. Sheep are also yes. Goats, yes. So animals like that. But then God throws in the curveball. So the camel is a no because it chews the cud, but it has no split hoof. The hyrax, which I just learned that it is a little rock dwelling critter, is also a no because it chews but no split hoof. The hare, same deal. The pig, also no because it has split hoof but does not chew the cud. So basically, God's saying if it's missing one of the two features, which are it has to have a split hoof or choose the cud, it has to have both. If it's missing one, then it's off the table. These weren't random bans. Each restriction helped distinguish Israel from pagan nations and likely protected them from diseases that came with poor meat handling. Next, God talks about seafood. So anything in the water that has fins and scales, you may eat. So salmon, tuna, cod, that's a yes. Catfish, shrimp, oyster, crabs, the good stuff is a nope. If it's slimy, squishy, or shell armored, it's a hard pass. Basically, if it looks like it could crawl out of a horror movie, don't put it in your stew. Now we move on to the skies. These you shall regard as detestable among the birds. And then he lists them: eagles, vultures, buzzards, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, herons, bats. In short, if it eats dead stuff or looks like it's judging you from a tree branch, don't eat it. But doves, pigeons, quail, and chicken, those were fine. God was okay with your Sunday roast chicken, thankfully. So now insects get a whole separate category. You can't eat creepy crawlers that slither or swarm on the ground. No beetles, no roaches, no ants. But wait, there's an exception. You may eat every kind of locust, critter, and grasshopper. Yep, grasshopper made the clean list. But I guess that's fine. But anyway, so if you ever see when you get to that part of the Bible about John the Baptist snacking on locusts and honey, he's following the Leviticus law to the letter. And also, side note, apparently locusts, and also actually like a lot of bugs, like those bugs that I've listed that you can eat, they're high in protein. Well, yeah, so bugs are apparently very high in protein, which is weird because they're practically nothing. Like they're just crunchy. It's just the skin, the outside part that's crunchy. Anyways, I don't know what makes them high in protein, but they're high in protein. So there you go. Just a little fun trivia. Um, Anything that creeps on its belly, crawls on four or more legs close to the ground, are totally unclean. So that means snakes, lizards, rats, moles, geckos, and chameleons were all banned. And it didn't stop there. If one of the critters died and touched your clothes, cooking pot, food storage jar, that item became unclean too. Sometimes you could wash it, other times you gotta smash it. It's God's version of if you see it, sanitize it. So why so many rules? At first glance, this whole chapter might seem like a big do not eat list, but underneath it is a deeper message. God was teaching his people how to be distinct. Every nation around them ate anything that moved. Some even used blood in rituals. Israel's diet became an everyday reminder we're not like them. We belong to a holy God. It's kind of like when your mom tells you to take off your shoes before entering the house. Not just because the floor's clean, but because the house represents something sacred. God was training Israel's taste buds for holiness. So this chapter reminds us that holiness often starts in the small habits. What we consume, where we walk, what we touch. We may not live under the Old Testament dietary laws anymore. Thank you, Jesus, for Acts 10, but the principle still stands. God cares about what we feed our bodies, minds, and soul. What are we eating spiritually? Are we filling ourselves with bitterness, um, gossip, junk thoughts, or with grace, truth, and peace? Holiness isn't just in your church clothes, it's in your choices. And right now this is also something that I am intentionally trying to practice. So ever since I've started my podcast, the whole, politics thing, the whole administration in the US also is like, you know, it's getting worse and it's just worse and worse. And it's like filling me with all these toxic thoughts and anger and hatred and all that stuff. So while I'm trying to learn about God and trying to share what I'm learning, all these things are happening too, and the devil is trying to fill my head with all these things, bad things, when I'm trying to put good things in my head and trying to share good things. The devil is trying to fill my head at the same time with all these negativity and bad things and hatred. So now I'm trying to be intentional about not even focusing on like the news and all that, because again, it's corrupting me, and I don't like that. So that is something that I am practicing. It's a small habit, not going on your phone and looking at the news or looking at the social media and all that. So that is something that I am doing right now intentionally to cleanse myself, because I need to be only putting good things in me so I can only also put out good things to the world. Um yeah. Anyways, so fun fact corner. Um Ancient food science. So scholars have discovered that many unclean animals carried parasites or diseases that thrived in the hot desert. God wasn't just making symbolic rules; He was protecting His people's health before, because back then there's no refrigeration, so it's not like they can just store things and it's okay, if you don't eat it until like 5 days later. That's not the case. So yeah. So that's why God had to be specific on what they could eat because of that. Another one, no lobster boils for Israel. I felt bad for those people back then because I love me some lobster, crabs. I prefer crabs over lobster, but yeah, all those, and then shrimp, and oh my gosh, like seafood boil, love it. But archaeologists have found Egyptian murals of people eating shellfish, often linked to pagan feasts. So God's restriction wasn't just about diet, it was distance from idol culture. It's just to distance them from the pagan culture that they know, because they lived in Egypt for so many years that that's all they know. So now God is trying to separate them from that culture and from that lifestyle. Um, Another bonus fact, in Hebrew, the word for holy is kadosh, Qadosh. Literally means set apart. So even the dinner table was a place of worship. Like imagine that. Holiness with every bite. And that is it for chapter 11. All right, chapter 12. The thunder of Sinai has faded. The priests are learning the rhythm of sacrifice, and the Israelites are figuring out what it means to live near a holy God. Now God shifts his focus to something tender, intimate, and universal: childbirth. Moses listens as God speaks. When a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she shall be unclean for 7 days. As at the time of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin, so the baby boy's foreskin, shall be circumcised. 7 days of rest, seclusion, and healing, and then on the 8th day, her baby boy is circumcised. It's both physical and spiritual, the mark of God's covenant with Abraham, carved into the next generation. Then God continues. She shall continue in the blood of her purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are completed. If she gives birth to a daughter, to a baby girl, double the time. 2 weeks of separation and 66 more days before she can re-enter worship. And somewhere a mom in the Israelite camp probably said, so wait, I have to stay home longer because I had a girl. But before we side-eye this ancient rule too hard, let's unpack what's actually happening here. So these laws weren't about shame or punishment. They were about the sacredness of life. In childbirth, a woman passes through something holy and dangerous. She brings new life into the world, but she also brushes against the shadow of death. In a world without hospitals, pain meds, or epidurals, giving birth was the ultimate act of courage. God wasn't calling her dirty. He was giving her a sacred timeout, a season to rest, recover, and reflect before returning to public worship. And the double time for our baby girls, many Bible scholars think it was a symbol of double honor. The girl could one day become a mother herself, meaning she carried potential for life within life. So when her purification time ended, the mother was to bring 2 offerings to the tabernacle: a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a pigeon turtle dove for a sin offering. But if she couldn't afford a lamb, God made space for her. Of course, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for the burnt offering and the other for the sin offering. See how kind that is? God didn't say no lamb, no blessing. He said, bring what you have, whether wealthy or poor. Every mother's offering mattered. And that offering wasn't about gift, it was about gratitude. Sin offering in Leviticus often meant offering for purification. It was her way of saying, God, you carried me through the danger. Thank you for this new life. Centuries later, a young woman from Nazareth would walk into the temple carrying her newborn son. She wasn't rich. She brought the humble offering of 2 doves, just like Leviticus 12 allowed. The moment in Luke chapter 2, verses 22 to 24 ties straight back here. The Savior of the world entered the temple through the same purification law his father had written. Now, isn't that poetic? the giver of life, carried by a woman who came to offer things for new life. This chapter might be short, but it is soaked in tenderness. It reminds us that God cares about women's health, about rest, about gratitude, and about the miracle of birth. See, even God talks about women needing rest after birth, but I digress. He doesn't rush mothers back into duty, he invites them to pause and heal. It's almost like God built maternity leave into the holiness code. And that offering of doves, it proves that God never measures our worship by how much we have, only by how sincere our hearts are. So whether you are offering lambs, doves, or a whispered thank you at midnight while rocking a crying baby, God sees you. All right, fun fact corner. Unclean is not equal or does not equate to unworthy. In Hebrew culture, unclean was a ritual state, not a moral state. It didn't mean sinful. It meant take a breather, then come back refreshed. Okay, and that is it for chapter 12. All right, chapter 13. So imagine this scene. The Israelite camp at sunrise. Tents in perfect rows, smoke rising from cooking fires, children laughing, and then suddenly someone yells, "Moses, come look at this weird rash." So yeah, chapter 13 is where God basically launches the first spiritual public health clinic. This is long urgent care, or Google searches that tell you every itch means you're dying. So instead, God establishes a priestly inspection system. It's not glamorous, but it's holy, because in this community, disease wasn't just a physical issue, it symbolized spiritual contamination. Okay, so okay. I'm getting ahead of myself. So God tells Moses and Aaron, when anyone has a swelling, rash, or shiny spot on the skin that might become a defiling disease, they must be brought to Aaron or one of his sons, the priests. So basically, if you woke up with a suspicious white patch, red patch, whatever, you didn't go to the pharmacy, you went to church. The priest would examine it carefully like a divine dermatologist. If the hair in the affected area had turned white or the spot seemed deeper than the surrounding skin, it was declared unclean. If it wasn't clear, the priest would quarantine the person for 7 days and recheck later. This wasn't punishment, it was protection. God was preventing infections from spreading through the camp. Now, if after a week the patch hadn't spread, the priest gave it another 7 days just to be safe. If it faded clean, it's clean. If it spread, it's unclean. So this was the original 14-day quarantine rule long before 2020 made it trendy. And yes, Leviticus was that detailed. So if the spot was white, pinkish, scaly, shiny, or flat, the priest had instructions. God was basically saying, I want my people healthy in body and spirit. The laws didn't stop with skin. If a man's beard had a yellowish patch or bald area that looked infected, time for another priestly inspection. If clothes developed mildew or greenish mold, that was also considered unclean. You could wash the garment once, but if the stain came back, God said burn it. That's right. No secondhand store, no donation pile. Don't even risk it, just straight to the fire. Because the uncleanness in Leviticus wasn't just about hygiene, it represented decay, death, and the things that spread quietly if ignored. So, when in doubt, just burn it. Now, if someone was diagnosed with a serious case, the dreaded defiling disease, often translated as leprosy, things got heartbreaking. The person had to tear their clothes, leave their hair unkempt, and cover their mouth, crying out, "Unclean! Unclean!" They had to live outside the camp until healed. Sounds harsh, but think about it. If the camp was the dwelling of God's presence, nothing representing decay could remain there. Still, imagine the loneliness, watching life go on from a distance. Parents, children, friends, all out of reach. Every sunrise would bring the same ache, like, will I ever go back? But here's what's amazing. God saw them even there, those people who were outside. Yeah. The very fact that there were restoration rituals later in chapter 14 proves that God didn't forget them. He already had a comeback plan. This chapter may sound like a checklist, but it's actually a spiritual mirror. God asking his people to notice what's growing quietly beneath the surface, to bring it forward, not hide it. Because sin often works the same way as infection. It starts small, spreads quietly, and if ignored, it corrupts everything around us. The priest didn't diagnose by panic. He took time. He rechecked. He looked for healing. That's the patience God has with us. He examines, not to shame, but to restore. So this chapter reminds us that holiness isn't just about not sinning, it's about awareness. God wanted his people to bring or to notice changes in their skin, their homes, their hearts. Sometimes healing requires honesty, admitting, hey, something's not right. That's where the restoration begins. And just like those ancient priests, we are called to watch for what spreads gossip, bitterness, resentment, pride, hatred. That is what I'm like watching right now. I'm trying to like cleanse myself from all of that and bring it to the healer before it infects everything else. Okay, fun fact corner. The original CDC. Priests in Israel were just spiritual leaders. They were health inspectors, sanitation experts, and counselors. A one stop shop for body and soul. They were actually like everything. Another one. So, covering the mouth when unclean. That's in verse 45 of this chapter. It's an ancient version of a face mask because I don't know what I don't know what they used to cover their mouth. It could be some kind of fabric, but you can't make this up. Like that was their version of a face mask. Yeah, I don't really have much fun facts, so that is it for chapter 13. All right, Leviticus chapter 14. The air is quiet outside the camp. Somewhere beyond the tents, in the dry wilderness, a man wakes up and runs his hand over his skin. For weeks, maybe months, he's been exiled with the others who were pronounced unclean, but today feels different. The sores are gone, the patches healed, the pain gone. So he shouts for a priest, not just any priest, the same kind who once declared him unclean. Because in God's system, the one who confirmed your pain also got to confirm your restoration. It just makes sense, right? So the priest leaves the camp and goes to meet him. No one else. Just the two of them, face to face in the open field. The priest examines him carefully. If the If the infection has truly cleared, the priest doesn't say, "Welcome back," just yet. There's a ritual first. There's a ritual for everything. And it's one of the most beautiful in all of Leviticus. The Bible says, "Then the priest shall order that 2 living clean birds be taken, along with cedar wood, crimson yarn, and hyssop." So here's the scene. 2 small birds fluttering in a basket, a piece of fragrant cedar wood, cedar wood is strong and rot resistant. Then a scarlet thread, a sprig of hyssop, and so this is a humble dessert plant used for purification. So the priest takes one of the birds and kills it over fresh running water in a clay pot. The water turns red, symbolizing life poured out. Then he dips the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn, and the living bird into the mixture. He sprinkles the healed person 7 times and declares, "You are clean." And then this is my favorite part. He shall release the living bird in the open field. So can you picture it? The second bird, soaked in crimson water, suddenly taking off into the sky, wings flapping wildly, droplets falling like tiny rubies in the sunlight. It's a visual sermon. One life given, one life set free. It's the gospel before the gospel. Get it? So after the ceremony, the person still doesn't go straight home. They wash their clothes, shave their hair, bathe, and re-enter the camp, but not their tent just yet. So yeah, they get to go back inside, but they cannot go into their tent just yet. They wait another 7 days. It's kind of, this time it's a spiritual quarantine to ensure full restoration. So on the seventh day, they shave everything, head, beard, eyebrows, even body hair, everything. They bathe again and become ceremonially clean. They can almost imagine their reflection in the water. A fresh start, literally stripped off everything old. You're like reborn. So then comes the grand finale, the offerings. On the eighth day, the person brings 2 male lambs without blemish, 1 female lamb, fine flour mixed with oil, a log, about a half a pint of oil. The priest takes 1 lamb for a guilt offering, waves it before the Lord, and places its blood on the person's right ear, right thumb, and right big toe. Why those spots? I've covered this on the last episode, but so it's because they represent what you hear, what you do, and where you walk. So again, right ear, right thumb, and right big toe. So they represent what you hear, what you do, and where you walk. God wasn't just cleansing their skin, he was restoring their purpose. When the priest pours some oil into his palm, dips his finger, and sprinkles it 7 times before the Lord, he applies the oil over the blood, ear, thumb, and toe again. The rest he pours on the person's head, anointing them like royalty. The message is clear. You're not just healed, you are holy. If the person was poor, God gave an alternate plan. Doves instead of lambs, of course, and then a handful of flour instead of log of oil. No one was left out of grace. Okay, the second half of this chapter shifts to a different kind of healing. Not of people, but of houses. Not of people, but of houses. When Israel settled in the promised land, God warned, if I put a leprous disease in a house of the land you possess. So that sounds dramatic, God putting it there. But it's really about God revealing what's hidden. Sometimes the walls themselves told the story of neglect, decay, or impurity. If a homeowner noticed green or reddish spots in the walls, they called for the priest. Or they're supposed to call for the priest. The priest inspected the house, emptied it, shut it up for 7 days, and then rechecked. If the infection spread, he ordered the affected stones removed and the wall scraped and replastered. If it comes back again, the whole house was torn down and dumped outside the city. And if it didn't come back, another two-bird ceremony took place, just like the one for people. 1 bird died, one flew free. Even the walls got a redemption story. So this chapter is redemption painted in symbols. It's about God who doesn't just forgive, he restores. He doesn't say, you're fine now, carry on. He says, let's start over fresh. Clean body, clean house, clean heart. Yeah. All right, so fun fact corner. The cedar wood symbolism. Cedar doesn't rot. That's why it symbolizes enduring purity. Even King Solomon used cedar to build the temple. God was saying, I'm giving you a foundation that won't decay. Isn't that nice? The hyssop connection. So the hyssop appears again in Jesus when Jesus is on the cross. A soldier offers him sour wine on a hyssop branch. And this is in John 19, verse 29. I think it's in John 19, verse 29, if I'm not mistaken. The same plant that cleansed the leper was there when the ultimate cleansing happened as well. All right, so yeah, that is it for chapter 14, y'all. Okay, chapter 15. So we've covered sacrifices, diets, skin conditions, and even moldy walls. You'd think that's as detailed as it gets, but no, in Leviticus 15, God says, let's talk about body fluids. So cue the collective ew from everyone listening. Well, before you fast forward, hang on. This chapter isn't gross. It's groundbreaking actually, because what God's really doing is teaching his people about purity, hygiene, and boundaries. The Lord speaks to Moses and Aaron again, because of course he does. They're basically managing Israel's first ever wellness center. So it says, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when any man had a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean." So, we're diving in. The word discharge here covers everything from infections to normal bodily functions. Basically, anything that leaves the body involuntarily, that covers men and women equally, because this isn't about gender, it's about awareness. Every fluid in the body represented life. So, when it left the body, it it symbolized the loss of vitality, a brush with morality. And since God is the God of life, anything that hinted at death or decay had to be purified before coming to his presence. So if a man had a continuous discharge, he was considered unclean. Everything he sat on, unclean. Everything he lay on, unclean. Whoever touch him or his things, unclean till evening, and must wash both body and clothes. God basically created a comprehensive public health code thousands of years before anyone knew what bacteria was. So if the discharge stopped, the man had to wait 7 days to wash his clothes and bathe in fresh water. Then on the eighth day, he brought 2 doves and pigeons, one for sin offering and one for burnt offering, and the priest would make atonement for him before the Lord. Sound familiar? It's the same rhythm again. Unclean to cleansing to offering to restoration. So, because in God's economy, every part of human experience, even the awkward parts, mattered. All right, let's talk about the intimacy clause. Then God addressed what happened after intimacy. If a man and woman came together, both became temporarily unclean until evening and had to bathe. So why? Not because intimacy was dirty, God invented it. It was sacred. The temporary uncleanness simply meant you've touched something holy. Now take a pause before approaching the altar. It's like when you've been at a beautiful concert, um, you just need a moment to let the experience settle before jumping back into regular life. So yeah, if you are, if you do intimate stuff with your spouse, just shower after. Next, God returns to women, specifically menstruation. When a woman has a discharge and the discharge in her body is blood, she shall be in her state of impurity for 7 days. Anything or anyone she touched became unclean until evening. At first glance, this seems restrictive, but remember, this wasn't about shame. This was protection. In an ancient world where women had no access to hygiene products. Oh, you know what? That's true. The law created a buffer, time for rest, separation from daily duties, and recovery. I wish that was still the case now, but whatever. And the community knew not to disturb her or judge her. They just gave her space. God literally built self care into the law. Then he adds that if a woman had a prolonged or irregular flow beyond her normal cycle, the same rule applied. Plus, she'd offer 2 doves once it stopped. So by now you might notice a pattern. Every physical process gets the same divine rhythm. Recognition, this is happening. Then rest, step back and let it pass. And then cleansing, wash, wait, and breathe. And then restoration, bring an offering and return to the community. And that is what this chapter is about, restoring community in these boundary. If these boundaries weren't in place, disease could have swept through the camp like wildfire. God's laws were not meant to humiliate, they were meant to protect life. So at the end of the chapter, God sums it up beautifully. You shall keep the Israelites separate from their uncleanness, so that they do not die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is among them. So, in other words, take my presence seriously, but also take care of yourselves. Holiness wasn't about perfection, it was about awareness. God wasn't policing bodies, He was dignifying them. He was saying, I made you. I know what you go through. And even when you're at your weakness, I've made a way for you to come back. Not nice. All right, fun fact corner. The symbolic 7. 7 days wasn't random. It symbolized completion. Like 7. 7 is completion. 6 is what was it? Oh, I'm blanking. But 7 represents completion, and then the number 8 represents a new beginning. But anyway, so I got distracted. 7 days symbolizes completion, restoration, renewal. So every cleansing cycle mirrored the rhythm of creation. Yeah. That is it. All right, that's it for chapter 15. Okay, chapter 16. The morning begins still and heavy. The tabernacle stands in silence. No laughter, no chatter, no random clanking of bronze utensils. Every Israelite knows today is different. So it is the Day of Atonement. One day a year, when the high priest steps into the very presence of God, not to offer just one person or one tribe, but for the entire nation. So after Nadab and Abihu's fiery mistake in chapter 10, God gives Moses specific instructions for how Aaron, the high priest, can safely approach him, because no one just strolls into the Holy of Holies. This was the most sacred space on earth, where God's presence hovered above the Ark of the Covenant between the cherubim wings. So God says, tell Aaron not to come whenever he chooses into my holy place behind the curtain, or he will die, for I appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. You could almost feel the air tighten. Holiness this pure had rules, of course. Aaron must wash, dress in special linen garments, and bring specific offerings. A bull for his own sin offering, and 2 goats for the people's sin offering. All right, so step 1 for the bull, atonement for the priest. So before Aaron can represent the nation, he must deal with his own sin. So he sacrifices the bull, takes its blood in a bowl and enters the Holy of Holies, the one and only day a human is allowed in there. In his hand, a censer full of burning coals and 2 handfuls of incense. He steps through the veil, trembling. The room fills with smoke, thick, holy, protective. It's God's version of mercy fog. Then Aaron sprinkles the bull's blood on the mercy seat and in front of it 7 times, symbolic perfection. Each drop says, cover me, Lord. Now step 2, the 2 goats, forgiven and forgotten. So now comes the most dramatic part. 2 goats are brought before Aaron and placed at the entrance of the tent. He casts lots, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for Azazel, translated as scapegoat. The first goat is sacrificed, its blood taken behind the veil and sprinkled like the bull's, cleansing the sanctuary itself from all the impurities of Israel. Because God's house wasn't just a place of worship, it was also where pollution had to be scrubbed clean. Then Aaron turns to the second goat, the one that's still alive. He lays both hands on its head. So he lays both of his hands on its head, closes his eyes, and begins to confess everything. Every forgotten lie, every grumble against Mana, every fight between neighbors, every doubt, every rebellion, every hidden thing, all of Israel's sin symbolically transferred to that goat. And when he is done, the goat is led away far into the wilderness, never to return. Can you imagine the people watching as it disappears over the horizon? I wonder what happens to the goat. But for each step the goat takes is a step away from guilt, shame, and regret. It's the ultimate object lesson. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgression from us. Step 3, cleansing everything. So once both offerings are done, Aaron cleanses the altar, the tent, and even himself again. He changes back into his regular priestly clothes, bathes again, and burns the remaining sin offering outside again. Even the man who released the scapegoat must wash before returning, because everything about this day is drenched in symbolism. Sin leaves the camp, holiness returns. Whew. So what the day meant, Day of Atonement. So by sundown, the nation exhales. The priests are exhausted. The air smells of incense and burnt offering, and the people quietly begin to rest. This was the only day in the entire year where everyone stopped completely. No work, no distractions, no just humility and reflection. God says, it's a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall deny yourselves. It is a lasting statute. This wasn't a punishment, it was a gift, a reset button, a clean slate. Okay, so if you listen closely, this chapter hums with the heartbeat of Jesus. The two goats are a double portrait of him. The first goat is sacrificed, bloodshed for atonement. The second, carrying sin away into the wilderness and forgotten. Both were fulfilled in one act on the cross. Jesus didn't just die for sin, he also took it away. The curtain that kept Aaron out, torn in two when Christ died. And that's in Mark 15, verse 38. The blood sprinkled on the mercy seat, replaced by his blood once and for all. The annual ritual finished forever. It's like God said, you don't need goats anymore. My sons got this. Well, the Day of Atonement teaches us two things about God's heart. He takes sin seriously, and he takes forgiveness even more seriously. Okay, so fun fact corner. The Azazel debate. Bible scholars have debated for centuries what Azazel means. Some say it's a desert demon. Others say it simply means complete removal. Either way, the image of the scapegoat has become a timeless metaphor for someone carrying blame that isn't theirs. Yeah, that is all I have for my fun fact corner. All right, on to, that is it for chapter 16. All right, we are at 53 minutes. We still have 2 chapters. All right, on to chapter 17. The fires of the Day of Atonement have cooled, but the air around the tabernacle is still thick with reverence. You can almost hear Israel holding its breath. The people have been cleansed, the scapegoat has vanished into the wilderness, and God speaks again. This time, his message is simple but heavy. He says, every drop of blood matters. So God starts by addressing Moses and Aaron directly. Speak to Aaron, his sons, and all the Israelites, and say to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. So he lays down a rule that probably made everyone glance at their backyard altars. Everyone from The house of Israel who kills an ox or a lamb or a goat in the camp or outside the camp and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, blood guilt shall be imputed to that person. So translation, no more private sacrifices. No sneaky backyard worship parties. No being God DIY altar edition. Because God's not just after their offerings, He is after their obedience. So every animal offering had to be brought to the tabernacle. Every ounce of blood spilled had to be handled in His presence. Why? Because this wasn't about meat. It was about meaning. In the ancient world, pagan nations sacrificed animals to all kinds of god in hidden corners and shady groves. But God was saying to His people, you're not like them. You bring everything, your worship, your thanksgiving, your blood to me alone. Then comes the famous verse, one of the most profound lines in all the scriptures. And it says, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you for making atonement for your lives on the altar. For as life, it is the blood that makes atonement. So let's sit with that for a moment. In God's design, blood is sacred because it carries life. To spill it is to touch life itself. And that's not something to do carelessly. So those blood packs that these kids do, that's a big no-no. Every sacrifice in Leviticus was a visual reminder that life must be given for life to be spared. Without the shedding of blood, Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Not because God is cruel, but because sin always costs something living. And that's why He forbids eating blood, whether from ox, goat, bird, or any wild animal. You shall not eat any blood, either of bird or animal, in any of your dwelling. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. To us, that might sound intense, but think of what God was doing. In pagan rituals, people often drank blood to try to absorb the life force of whatever was sacrificed. It was dark. It's like very culty and directly opposed to what God stood for. God's people were not to consume life. They were to respect it. So every meal became a small act of worship. Even when they hunted, they had to drain the animal's blood and cover it in dust, like a tiny burial, acknowledging this life came from you, God. The dinner table was a place of reverence. Their cooking rituals were silent sermons. Life is precious. Thank you for sustaining ours. So the command isn't just about diet, it's about dependence. God was telling Israel, you don't control life, I do. Every heartbeat belongs to me. Every living thing is mine. And when I allow you to eat, enjoy, and be filled, remember that it's by my grace. It's a call to gratitude, not restriction. Oh, all right. Fun fact corner. So, blood as sacred currency. In the ancient world, blood was considered the life price. It sealed covenants, oaths, and even royal treaties. God used the same symbol but purified it. No manipulation, just mercy. All right, so that's it for chapter 17. All right, last chapter of this episode, chapter 18. The desert sun is setting, painting the horizon in gold and rose. The Israelites are gathered near the tabernacle, the smell of campfires, the hum of evening conversations. God has already taught them how to worship, how to stay clean, how to respect blood and life itself. Now He speaks to Moses again. His tone is firm but fatherly. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. That's the heartbeat of this chapter. Before he lists a single rule, God reminds them who he is, the Lord your God. This isn't about controlling them. It's about protecting them, about setting them apart from Egypt, where they came from, and from Canaan, where they're going. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you live, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. God's like, you are not Egypt, you are not Canaan, you are mine. The first part of the chapter is all about family and sexual boundaries, and at first it reads like a long list of don'ts. But underneath the repetition is the tenderness of a father saying, I want your relationship to stay whole, safe, and sacred. None of you shall approach anyone near of kin to uncover their nakedness. In modern terms, no exploitation, no crossing the sacred line of families, no blurring what God has made distinct. In ancient cultures, incest and sexual coercion were common, even normalized. Pharaohs married sisters, Canaanite priests exploited women in temple rituals. God steps in here to protect the vulnerable and preserve dignity. He lists each relationship not because he is nitpicking, but because he's teaching a people who had just left centuries of slavery, what honor looks like in freedom. So that is what he's teaching his people. Then the chapter shifts from family to culture. God warns them, you shall not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech. Molech was a false god worshipped by fire, literally through child sacrifice. It's horrifying, but tragically real. Archaeologists have found evidence of Canaanite child sacrifice in large bronze idols, arms outstretched over flames. God says, not in my people, not in my name. He wasn't just banning cruelty, he was banning hopelessness. Molech worship thrived on fear. God's worship thrives on faith. Then he moves to another boundary, sexuality itself. He commands that intimacy remain within marriage between a man and a woman, and condemns acts outside that covenant. So adultery, same gender relations, and bestiality, not out of hatred or disgust, but because he's drawing a clear moral line between sacred love and destructive imitation. He is saying, don't defile what I made beautiful. Don't let desire rewrite design. Then God says something chilling but poetic. It says, do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations I am casting out before you have defiled themselves. The land became defiled, and I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. So it's graphic. The land vomited them out. Like creation itself couldn't stomach injustice and immorality anymore. God was warning them that sin doesn't just affect individuals, it poisons the environments, the culture, the generations after. When corruption becomes normal, even the soil cries out. Yeah. And I'm praying for the soil to cry out right now. Oh. At the heart of chapter 18 is the truth. Holiness begins in the hidden places. You can't offer pure sacrifice while living a double life. You can't walk in God's presence on Sabbath and walk over people's dignity the rest of the week. Holiness isn't about being weird, it's about being whole. It's about choosing God's design over society's trends. It's about protecting love from selfishness, family from confusion, and faith from compromise. So when God ends the chapter saying, you shall keep my statutes and my ordinance and not do any of these abominations, he's not being authoritarian, he is being parental. He's saying, don't lose the identity I gave you. You're not meant to blend in, you're meant to bless. So this chapter shows us that God's holiness isn't about rituals, it's about relationships. He cares how we treat people behind closed doors as much as how we worship in public. Holiness is love with boundaries. It's faithfulness when no one's watching, integrity. It's living in such a way that even your private choices reflect a sacred trust between you and God. And while these specific laws here were given to ancient Israel, the principle still stands today. Don't live like everyone else when you're called to live like you are His. God God's ways aren't meant to cage us. They're meant to keep us from destruction. Now, when He says don't, it's usually to protect a deeper do. Do love purely. Do live freely. Do walk faithfully. All right, fun fact corner. Let's talk about Molech's idol design. Historical records describe Molech as a hollow bronze statue with a bull's head. Fires were lit beneath it, and offering, tragically, even children were placed in its arms. God's ban wasn't arbitrary, it was a rescue. Um, what else? Oh, well, I guess that is it for chapter 18. All right, and that, my friends, wraps up Leviticus episode 2, the halfway mark through one of the Bible's toughest but most transformative book. We've seen fire fall from heaven, priests learning reverence, families learning boundaries, and a God who is both terrifyingly holy and tenderly present. This entire stretch has been God saying, if you want my presence to stay among you, it's not just about the altar, it's about your attitude, your home, your heart. So next time we will dive into Leviticus 19 through 27. That's going to be the last chapter of this series. So Leviticus 19 to 27 is what's known as the holiness code. It's where God moves from don't touch this to here's how to live beautifully. We'll talk about generosity, justice, festivals, Sabbaths, and Jubilee, the original divine reset button for the whole nation. So stay tuned, keep your heart soft, and remember, holiness isn't about perfect. It's about staying connected to the one who is. Anyway, so thank you for listening to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye. If you have enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, subscribe, or leave a review wherever you're watching this or listening to this. And also, you can catch new episodes only on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Until next time, keep laughing. And as always, stay curious.